Welcome to the BCS Debates Making Software Secure. Security is a huge issue in the IT industry, and whilst at the network level there are plenty of products and good practices in place to make it secure, at the application level it's a different story. The software now presents a huge, sometimes soft target for those that are criminally inclined to attack. So to discuss how these things might be obviated today, we have around the table John Colley from ISC Squared.
Hello.
We have Anthony Kesterton from Rational Software, part of IBM, and Dan Hagman from 7Safe.
Hi, Brian.
So, gentlemen, let's start off with this question. There seems to be almost a culture now of unfinished software, service packs, patches, all sorts of updates. What can we do about that, Dan?
The problem is with networks and software is they're becoming increasingly complex, and the rollout of bespoke software in firms is taking more and more effect, and we're seeing a lot of the infrastructure, whilst it's been secured, the effort, if you like, has been going into that rather than the application. And the problem with applications we now see is they are becoming more complex, they are more distributed, they may be placed in the cloud, they may have all sorts of other things associated with them. And there's really a traditional, if you like, mindset approach of secure the network rather than an understanding of the application. And whilst people think that they then have that secure, putting weak applications in or applications that aren't designed correctly exposes the network just as much, or the resources just as much, as an unpatched network itself.
Is it the situation then that things are actually too complicated for us to control completely, or is that a defeatist attitude from the offset?
I think you really have to work on the basis that there are insecurities in whatever you do, and you've got to protect them as best you can. So you can't assume that something is secure, because it won't be for very long.
Okay, so is it commercial pressures then that perhaps lead to a more flaky approach to software at the...
Well, I think I take a slightly different approach. I don't think we should accept that security flaws are always going to be in software. I think the approach we need to take is much more one of thinking about security right the way throughout the life cycle. We don't tend to think about security at the design stage. We look at it at the coding stage. Quite often it's not tested for security things. We do the testing retrospectively. We put it in and then see whether it works, rather than making sure it works in the first place. In terms of commercial pressures, yes, I'm sure there are commercial pressures. I used to work in systems development, and it was always this balance between functionality, cost and timescale. So I'm sure there are commercial pressures, but that doesn't mean to say we shouldn't be doing it properly.
No.
I think you're absolutely spot on. The engineering of security right in from the beginning of the solution doesn't tend to still feature, and it's very few times that we would ever see an organisation instigating a software development program and security being put in right from the beginning. It seems that they are after a business solution, they're after something that is functional, it does a role, rather than it protects against. And so that engineering is absent, or if not absent, it's often misunderstood. So we think of security, we've got to keep stuff out, but no one actually thinks, what will my application be used for, and what type of environment would it be placed in? Therefore, what threats do I need to engineer in to protect it, if that makes sense?
Well, so hopefully a solution to a threat, not a threat.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, absolutely. So, you know, how can you possibly solve a problem if you haven't defined what that problem is?
Are you saying the approach to security is just too general then?
It can be. It can be. I think people, from what I experience in the firms that we all see in our professional lives day in, day out, is that people think of security as I'm at risk, but they never really think about what am I at risk for or against, if you like. What am I trying to defend against? They just know they've got to do some stuff about security. Right. And that in the application, doing stuff is a good thing, but what specifically are they sorting out here? Have we got a front-end application server that's perhaps going to be more exposed than a back-end CRM? Or is that CRM at more risk because it's available to hundreds of, if not thousands of users?
So we're going back to the old debate about functional versus non-functional requirements. People are very keen on actually getting functionality in a system, but they don't spend as much time or as focus on the non-functionals, of which security is a major part of that. Right. So if this is being, as you mentioned, being considered right up front, then that's something that we can actually deal with and actually start planning in and thinking about that security from the beginning. And then when you tie it through that life cycle, where you're actually actively testing for security right the way through, as opposed to at the end, it's almost a replay of the debate about when do we test? Do we test at the end of a life cycle? Do we test at the beginning? And how do we do it? So I think it would be wise to look at the approaches people have taken to testing and how they've migrated that up the life cycle, and let's incorporate security as part of that whole testing process.
Yeah, I think that's important because, I mean, you know, and testing needs to be done almost right the way through the life cycle. I mean, and obviously we think about testing as testing code, but I mean, we should be reviewing or looking at threat models both at the requirement stage and also at the design stage, which we tend not to do. We don't say, well, what could go wrong with this if we built it in that sort of way. We tend generally do the design, build it, and then test it.